What up, fam? Welcome back to another episode of the Business of DJing. It's your host, Jamie Selects. Thank you so much again for tuning in. It's been a little while since I've done an episode, but happy to be back. Have a quick announcement before I introduce my guest. I launched an online store for all my digital DJ tools on a platform called Gumroad. So you can check it out in the link below, or you can also go to jamieselects.gumroad.com. That's Gumroad. What's currently in there are two different DJ business finance trackers. There's like a basic one in Google Sheets, and there's another cool automated one in Airtable where if you upload a CSV of your transactions, it will automatically calculate or categorize your transactions for you. There's also a DJ booking system, which will pull in your DJ gigs from Google Calendar, and then if you're doing a lot of booking of DJs, you can just add a DJ and it will automatically invite them to calendar invites. Should help you avoid like double bookings and also making sure you have no shows and things like that. And then lastly, I have a lifetime product bundle which gives you everything at a discounted price, and then also it gives you access to any future content that I launch in there as well. So go ahead and check it out, jamieselects.gumroad.com. As always, give me some feedback. Hopefully, the thing is useful for you. If not, then let me know. I'll make it better. Cool. So my guest today is DJ Frank G. Frank is the founder and owner of Exclusive DJ based out of Stockton, California. It was an honor to have him on the podcast as he's indirectly had a big influence on my DJ career. We had a great conversation starting with his introduction to DJing as an OG and his path towards starting his own business and how he landed up on focusing on mobile DJing versus club DJing, the differences between those, the pros and cons, and how you can decide what's best for you. So really enjoyed this conversation. Hope you do too. Again, we got DJ Frank G out of Stockton, California, owner of Exclusive DJ. Check it out. All right, cool. What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Business of DJing. It's your host, Jamie Selects. Thank you again for tuning in. Today, I have a very awesome guest. Goes by DJ Frank G, owner of Exclusive DJ. Very excited to have you on, my man. Thank you for coming on.
I appreciate you having me on. This is pretty exciting.
Cool, for sure. Well, I had to do this because you're. I wanted to give a little intro. So, wanted to start off just by saying you definitely had indirectly, sort of in a way, had a big impact on my life in the sense that, I've always heard this story from MC, our friend Selecta MC, Marcellus Caton, that, when he was just getting started DJing, that you kind of had some advice for him, like, DJ in the clubs is cool, but there's also, a lot of money to be made, also like a real business that you can create for yourself doing mobiles and, doing mobile DJing. And I learned everything that I know about mobiles, weddings, setting up gear, how to treat clients, a lot, mainly from MC. And so I know you had a big impact on him. So just wanted to start off by saying thank you for that. And, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, my
to talk about it.
pleasure. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I met Marcellus MC Selecta years ago when he was probably just getting into college or right out of high school. I was trying to show my sons who were also into music, not into the mobile game. They just love music. And at that time was probably, let's say, 2008, 2009 era. And the EDM music was just barely beginning to explode before it really got to mainstream. And so they fell in love with the EDM music at the time. And I grew up in an era where there were other DJs before me that were doing events in downtown Stockton at the Civic Auditorium.
Mhm.
And so I was very fascinated and very intrigued with attending these events because they would have rappers at the time. Hip hop was a big thing in the mid to late 80s. So there was artists like Eazy-E, the old hip hop heads from back in the day were coming to the Civic Auditorium, which was kind of odd at the time. A lot of the breakbeat type music, like your Egyptian Lovers, your LA Dream Team, groups and artists that were just hitting the music scene when things weren't really mainstream. It was kind of, based off anybody who was doing mix shows on radio, and you would hear the music. And I grew up on that style of music, if that makes any sense. So I was always fascinated, to go see these artists that I would only be able to hear on tape through the radio or if I went and bought their record. So I didn't know what they looked like. I just know I like their music. And so, long story short, it's a business in the end. And so knowing that, there was money to be made because I already kind of had experience having started my own DJ business. That if I can show you guys a way to make a little extra income for yourselves when you are in high school, in college, as a mobile DJ to do little house parties here and there, I know that having that extra cash as a young person goes a long way, right? So I had already invested money and gear in myself. So I had the items sitting around, and I had a good connection with a guy who had a theater here in Stockton. It was called at the time, it was years ago, it was called the Stockton Royal. And then it became the Empire Theater on Pacific Avenue, which is the old
Right.
Miracle Mile area. So I befriended him, and we hit it off pretty well. And I was able to rent the venue from him to do these dances again with the concept that I had when I was younger and I was going to high school, that I enjoyed going to these dances. And I thought, you know what, you guys are in a different world, different style of music. But I would think there's students out there with the lack of things going on in our area, that if we can give some of them an outlet, something to do that's positive, um, we could create this. I already had the gear. All I needed was the people to come help me put it together. So I kind of showed them a little bit about how it was to promote, how to throw a dance, the logistics of it, and all the labor that goes into it. The funny thing is, when you love what you're doing, at least when I'm doing these type of things, it's like I don't feel that I'm putting any effort or labor into it. So it doesn't feel like it's a heavy load because I'm so involved in the actual production of it. Like, I want this to happen. And you go to a regular job, you're like, man, I'm tired of this, I'm tired of that. And you're kind of thinking in that way. This was like, let's just put it all together. And it was always for fun. So it never really felt like you were working, if that makes any
Right.
sense. And so when that happened, I knew my sons had friends, and Marcellus was one of the few young ones that Frank, my son Frank, had introduced me to, in Esteban. And so we brought him on board. And again, I didn't want to be the DJ. That was not my market. I wanted them to understand how the business worked and how to put a production together. But I didn't want to be the DJ. I just wanted to be able to provide them with the gear that I knew they didn't have at the time. And
Right.
so we sought out younger DJs so that they can invite their high school friends and come have a good time. And it worked out really well. We had one time where we did like a donation drive where kids brought in cans of food, perishable food items that we can give back to the food bank for a reduced ticket price. And it was fun. Again, we were doing things for the community, at the same time giving the young adults an outlet for them to do. And we were strictly playing the house EDM style of music, because again, that was barely taken off. And at that time, again, to not make this long winded, is when I first had my first connection with MC. And we hit it off pretty well, because he seemed like a smart young man, and we had good conversations. And I can see it and sense it in his vibe that he's learning something. You know what I mean? And I'm really glad to see where he's at now and what he's doing, and that he's been able to share this with you guys.
Well, yeah, man, we're eternally grateful for that guidance in the young age, because it's definitely ingrained in us moving forward, and especially in him and into plural, which is a big part of my life. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So why don't we touch base a little bit more on like kind of your intro to DJing? I think you touched on it there with like your early musical influences, but how would you say that you realized that music, you wanted it to be a big part of your life in the beginning, and then how did that transfer into actually getting like your first set of turntables, or what was your first exposure to DJing?
My first exposure to DJing was, I'm going to have to say, when I started to watch MTV years ago, and they would have video clips of people dancing. And on occasion, you'd see a pan off to the left or to the right, and you'd see someone in the back, right, with two turntables, playing music, not necessarily hyping people up, but he was in charge of the music. And in front of him was always somebody dancing, having a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what first attracted me was the music, right? And I grew up in the early 80s, so I was a break dancer. That was my first love. It's like, I love the music. So I had friends at that time. We were probably, I'm going to say, 10 to 12. We were in a breakdancing group. We had the older brothers who were our guiders, our guidance. And we kind of followed them around. And before you know it, we had a 5 or 6 man breaking group. And so that was really fun. But what happened then is that um, I would also listen to radio a lot. And at the time, there was a very popular radio station here in town called KUOP, and it's actually on the UOP campus, right
Mm.
at the very top of the Burns Tower. And every Friday or Saturday night, they would have these DJs just play again back to the breakdancing music, your Planet Rock, your Africa Bambata, your what is the DJ if you can't scratch, Egyptian Lover. That style of breakbeat music is what we were using um, in our practice garages or when we go to compete at a local union hall of some sort, right? Where there would be battles, like legit battles of breakdancing. And so obviously that music is being played by somebody, and it was obviously the DJ. I had a neighbor at the time. I was living in some apartment complexes back in the day, and they were in Stockton. They're called the Filbert Arms. All right, Filbert Arms was like a big deal back in the day. It's like that's the hood, and I have love and respect for that because that's the area that I grew up in. So I made a lot of friends. A lot of them are still friends of mine today. And I remember one time vividly, I opened up my window in my back room. There was only a 2 bedroom apartment, and the we were on the first floor, and behind me was another complex which had a first and a second floor, and his apartment complex had a first and a second floor. And I remember looking up out the window, and he had opened up his window, and I could look straight up, and I saw posters on the ceiling of his room. He had opened the door and he put a speaker on the window sill, and he started
Mm.
blaring this music. Right, it was hip hop. Probably back in the day was probably I don't know, EPMD stuff from that era, and it sounded awesome. And then I can hear him twiddling around with his mixer and his turntable and doing these scratching, and I was like, oh my god, that's dope, right? And so I would just look forward to have him put a speaker out and listen to his music while everyone's outside just kind of walking through the apartment complex, or his buddies are hanging out outside either dancing or rhyming or whatever. And that was kind of the culture back then. Again, it was hip hop. It was, during the Run DMC days, prior to the Run DMC days, it was all just, boom bop type sounds and great hip hop. He wasn't playing any of the breakdance stuff, but it was all hip hop, and it was dope. It was real dope, and that really intrigued me because I was like, you can hear the scratches, and it was like, dude, that's this guy's doing it up there, right? So I wasn't his friend because he was a lot older than I was, so I never had the courage to go knock on his door or be like, yo, can you show me or whatever. But I realized that, okay, that's a DJ, and that's the stuff that they're doing on the radio that I can't see. I can only hear it through the radio, right?
Right,
So it
right.
intrigued me. And when I got into high school, I met some friends, and that were the DJs. One of them was a DJ for the rallies in high school, and he would, on occasion, I think the school would probably allow him to DJ rallies once a month. And I became his friend through other friends because he was already, I think, a senior, and I was just coming in as a freshman. And one day we went to his house. He had a basement. It's funny because it seems like every time it relates to old hip hop or just DJs, somebody always has a basement, right? And so he had this basement, and so we went downstairs, and he was the first guy that I saw with a set of Technique 1200s. And I was like, whoa, this guy has like legit turntables. I don't know what kind of mixer it was, probably a Gemini back in the day. This was before Newmark even became out. And
Right.
again, great mixer, had a ton of records. And I fell in love with that culture because we started to become friends. We started to do little house parties here and there. Again, I had nothing. I was just hanging around with them. So that was a big influence for me personally, to be just hanging around people who were doing what I wanted to do. And I still had not yet figured out, "Okay, how am I going to get into this? Where am I eventually going to, fall in line with this?"
What was
So,
that process like for you to like either ask
oh my
to
God.
try it out, or how did that go
Well,
down?
I was, you know what? I mean, I was working, kid you not, I started working when I was 13. So at the time, when I was in junior high, which was 13, 14, they had summer jobs, and you can actually apply for a summer job every year. So at the age of 13, I applied for a summer job. You're just doing janitorial work, and I was doing it actually at the junior high that I was attending. So I'd go work there during the summer, and it was called the summer youth program. And that, I wish they would bring that program back. If they don't, I don't know what the deal is with that. But it allowed people like myself who had no experience. Obviously, we're young, but it
Hmm.
gave us an opportunity to find ways to work, legitimately work, and save some money. And so again, this we're talking back in the day. I think the minimum wage was 3.35 an hour. So you can imagine how many hours I had to put in to try to save a few $100.
Yeah, for
But
real.
I did. But I did, right? I
Hmm.
did. And so I worked that for 2 years, and I was always asking people like, you know anybody who's got some turntables for sale? And nobody had turntables for sale. So one time a friend of mine told me, oh, you need to go to this store. They've got them on sale right now. So I went to the store, and it was called Fred Rated or Federated or Fred Rated. It was in Stockton. It was on March Lane. And I went there, and I talked to the guy, again, not knowing much about turntables. I just knew that I needed turntables. I didn't really understand the whole pitch concept, any of that. I just knew I needed two turntables. So the guy says, oh, we've got them. So I get there, and the guy sells me one turntable with one pitch, and then one turntable without a pitch. And these are belt driven, right? And they were techniques. But again, I didn't know nothing about anything. You'd have to pick up the tone arm, and then that would actually engage the table to spin. I didn't realize, like, this anything, again, like you're dealing with a
Hmm.
1200. That's a totally different animal. So when I asked the guy, I said, "Hey, my understanding to be a DJ, you need to have pitch control on both sides so you can you can mix the records." And I don't know why. Again, I was naive. I've done myself. I just had some money in my pocket. I wanted to do this so bad that I wanted to have these things in my possession right away.
Yeah.
So he told me some line, which to me at the time made sense, that, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to pitch one side, and then the other side you can slow down, or pitch it up with your finger by itself. So you really don't need two pitches, or something to that degree. And I fell for it, right? I bought these plastic turntables, belt driven, only to get them home and realize after that I couldn't even scratch on them because the needle would jump right off, the table would stop, the turntable would stop spinning. It was ridiculous, and again, had no guidance. So it wasn't like I had an older brother or younger brother who would come with me to these stores. It was like all alone. So I learned the hard way. I went and invested on things like this, not realizing what I was spending my money on because I was so eager to have these in my possession. And so it took a while to finally come up with some extra money and find the real techniques, right? And when I
Yeah.
did, I found like a model 1800, which I haven't seen again, ever again. That the pitch control was set up in a different area of the turntable, but it had a pitch control. It was direct drive, so it worked just exactly like the 1200. It just was a different model altogether. And so I got that first, and eventually I came across the 1200 through another friend at another place at another time. Eventually I had both of them, two different mismatched turntables, but they did what they were supposed to. And then the first mixer I bought was a realistic mixer from Radio Shack. And I still have that mixer today. I mean, it's kind of beat up and dusty, but I kind of kept it just because it's the first thing I started on years ago.
You gotta keep
Probably create a shadow box for that.
it.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Just
Yeah,
it's a
for real.
memory that I only know about, but it holds a lot of dear value to myself. And so when we had this, now I had the turntables. Now I had high school friends who had, speakers like house stereo, and they would
Right.
tear their parents' house stereo apart. They would pull out the amplifier or the receiver at the time,
Right.
and they had these subwoofers that were probably the biggest ones were probably 12 inches. They were towers, and they would just sit on the ground. And so somebody from high school would be like, "Hey, we're gonna have a party. You guys want to come and DJ?" And again, we did this for the love of it. We didn't do it for the money. And so we just wanted to be providing entertainment and playing our music to a group of friends or people that wanted to come and hang out at a house party. So we would lug, his parents' system. We'd take it apart, plug all the speakers, and then I'd bring the turntables. And then I had another friend of mine who actually went out and bought the records. So he was a real vinyl freak and would order these records from Miami. So he had a resource in Miami that he would call, right, long distance at the time. When you're young and in the 80s, you're picking up the phone, right, a dial tone phone, and you're dialing an area code that is not within your area code. They're immediately charging you, right? So
All
these
right.
calls were,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kids don't know
So
about
he
that.
had, yeah, oh, absolutely not. So when you pick up the phone, it becomes, a $20 call because you're having to call long distance to Miami, and you have to call under their time frame, right? So our time was like 3 hours behind or 4 hours behind in California. They're ahead, so he had to get up early before he went to school to order these records. And so they would mail us, or specifically him, a list of what the new records were out at the time. So, you got the snail mail. So we'd wait 2 or 3 weeks, and this new list of music or records that were being put out at the time would come in. He'd look them over. We'd look it over and be like, oh, we didn't know much about the song. We just knew about the artist. So if there was a bass record, like MC Shy D or uh, Mantronics, Play D, anything that had certain artists that we already had recognized, we kind of just figured, you know what, they must be good. Let's just buy these. So he'd order 5 or 6, 7 records. Again, 2 or 3 weeks later would pass, and then this other new shipment of records would come in. He was probably, out of our group of friends, someone who had, the capability or the funds to buy these records. And so we would bring him on. He'd provide the records. I'd provide the turntables and the mixer, and then my buddy would provide the audio, which would be the house receiver with the 2 speakers. And then we pitched in on a siren light, which was probably, maybe not even a foot high. It was probably like 8 inches high off the table, and then just spun around in a red color. And that was our light show, right? But
Right.
nobody cared
Yeah.
about that. It was just about playing music. And again, we weren't real savvy with it. We were just happy to play and blend records. Sometimes they'd be total train wrecks, but nobody really cared about that. It was just, again, a vibe. And you can't, I yet to come across that ever again. And I think it was the time and era, again, when we were growing up, where somebody would recorded that, and we can reminisce on that. But it's all in our minds, right? And it's a
Yeah.
memory that will never go away. And so I kind of just went from there. I knew that I wanted to do radio when I was in high school. So I kind of told myself internally, like, by the time I graduate high school, my next goal is to work in radio. So I did go to Delta after I graduated. I went there for a year. I did their broadcast journalism program. And fortunately, I was able to meet some people at the time that I was able to get onto a local radio station in town and become like a mix show artist back at the time, as they were called.
Right.
And so we would break new records. But again, so that kind of gives you an idea of how I started. Personally, for me, I didn't realize I was going to get into DJing so heavy. I know I love music because in the early 80s, if you watched MTV or you see old videos from back in the day, you would only hear the artists like the Madonnas, the Michael Jacksons, some of the rock bands would be on there. And one of the artists that was on there that was heavily played was Daryl Hall and John Oates. And
Mm.
so the record that really did it for me, or the song that did it for me, was Man Eater. I think it was called Man Eater. And it had a lot of saxophone. So back in the 80s, a lot of music had a lot of saxophone in it. Real popular song was the Careless Whisper, the George Michael, the Wham song, right? A lot of
Mm.
saxophone. And so really my first love of music was through the saxophone. And before I even decided to even, dabble in the DJ stuff, I wanted to learn to play sax. So my parents rented a saxophone for me to take lessons in school. But unfortunately, funds were tight. So after 1 month of rental fees, it was like, hey, we can't afford to pay for the sax again. So it's either you buy one or you're just gonna have to put it away. And I held on to it for probably another 1 or 2 months. I didn't pay the late fees. I gave it back to the rental company that we borrowed from. Felt bad, of course, but I had to put that away. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to get a sax. So again, me liking music, I kind of fell into the whole breakdancing thing, and then just kind of took off from there, and then fell in love with the culture, with the hip hop sound and the rhymes and the lyrics at the time, and then the whole scratching, and then just feeling the positive vibe and the whole dancing collaborated all together, and just kind of took off from there. I never went back to saying, hey, I want to learn to play an instrument, which I kind of regret now because I would have loved to learn to play, saxophone, or just to be able to read music or anything in that regard. Because now it's like, you know, it's so knowledgeable and so important to have that stuff if you want to continue to elevate your game.
Right. No, for sure. And then I want to touch on how we got from like radio to then how exclusive DJ came up. But I want to touch on one thing because when I think about, hearing that story, how I came up, I obviously had a very privileged upbringing in DJ world in the sense that one, I had Joe and Marcellus and Alon with the gear already.
Right.
I learned on essentially Serato S9 and turntables, and then it was like the internet era, so there was
Yeah.
no music's everywhere, which is like its own problem, I think. But I want to just ask a little bit more about kind of the discovery of music in the vinyl era, in particular like radio. And I'm just curious, did you being on the radio give you access to music more easily since like you were kind of being given records, or did you still have to go like to record stores kind of? I'm guessing you did a little both, but I'm wondering what was the music discovery, what was the digging process like in that era?
It's still the same in the sense that if you're looking for unique gems, a lot of the time, the mainstream record labels were not putting those out. It was somebody else who was creating them, and then somehow they'd get some airplay, right? Because again, back in the day, you didn't have the access like we have now, where we can jump on the phone or on the internet and watch a performance from a DJ, at a boiler room or at some sort of other day party where you're like, oh, that was a dope record, or that was a dope this and that,
Right.
it was different, right? So the mainstream radio or record labels would provide all the hits. So you had the Def Jams, the uh, who were the other, Arista, Jive. All these record companies were providing records to us as radio DJs to play on during the mix shows. But then you also had the other stuff that was in between, and the in between stuff is what actually, for me personally, would drive me to the clubs, right? Because that's the stuff that kind of stood out that they couldn't find anywhere else. So you couldn't go to a record store, or well, actually, my apologies, you could go to the record store and find it because that's the
Mm-hmm.
only place you'd find it. You couldn't get that directly shipped to you from a record label because there were bootlegs. I mean, bootlegs have existed for a while, and you'd find
Right.
these white label records where it looked like somebody wrote the title and everything with a Sharpie, and they'd make so many copies. And once you befriended the record store, clerks or whatnot, they would make connections, or you'd call in, again, long distance calls. You'd call from here. I'd go to San Jose or San Francisco, and I'd ask about a certain record, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we have 10 copies," and be like, "Hold one for me now," right? I probably wouldn't get to San
I'm on the
Francisco for
way.
about another week. Yeah, you know. And again, young, I didn't have my own car, so I'd have to wait on someone to go out there with. So it wouldn't be like I could just, "Hey guys, we're gonna go right now," hang up the phone and bounce out of there. It'd be like, "Hey, can you hold it for a week?" And I'd somehow find a way to get there. Those that were cool enough to be like, "You want to just us to mail them to you," right? They would. There was also another record pool that I was actually allowed to be a part of, and a friend of mine introduced me to that. But you had to be, the only way you could get into these record pools where you had to be a legitimate working DJ. And most of the time, they wanted a DJ who was going to give their records a spin on the radio. And so at that time, the record company was called BADA, which stood for Bay Area Dance Disc Jockey Dance Association, or something to that degree. So it was BADDA, and there was only, I believe, up to 300 members, right?
Right.
So the record labels would provide them 300 copies, and then you'd have a little cubby hole that you can, they'd throw all these records in, you pay your fee, and you'd go out there when you can to collect your records. And many a times there'd be certain records that they wouldn't press 300 copies of. They'd only press 100, and usually they'd give those to the first 100 members of the group, or someone who was actually really putting these records to use. And so you'd miss out on some of those amazing gems. But back to your question though, is that I would still have to go to the Bay Area and find certain records that I personally heard from someone else playing them, right? So I
Right.
was very influenced by Bay Area radio. For me, my DJ heroes were the Cameron Paul, Michael Erickson. Specifically those guys. Those guys are the ones that I looked up to, that were playing the music and mixing the music the way I enjoyed it. Right? They knew how to write a mix. They knew how to make great transitions. They knew how to keep music exciting. And obviously, you'd only get that in the Bay Area. So for me, that was a big influence. And I knew they were buying their music out somewhere out there. And as soon as I found out what record stores they were shopping at, I kind of became a fan of those record stores. So every once in a great moon, every could be 2 or 3 months, I'd make the drive out there with somebody, and we go out and shop and spend all our money on records. Never had. You don't know if you ever seen that meme that says you you teach a kid to DJ, you'll never have to worry about him, being a drug addict, because that's where we would spend all our money, and so
That's funny.
that was really honest. That was really honest. Again, we were very passionate about that. And so when we were doing the mix shows, if the PD, which is the program director, would allow you to sneak in these other records that were not sponsored or printed by a major record company, he was cool about that. But then again, they started to tighten things down. We're like, yeah, you can't play that. It's like, why not? I mean, that's a song that everybody loves at the club. It's like, yeah, but we're not a club. We're the radio, and you have to play stuff that the radio plays. And so it kind of took the fun away from doing mix show stuff, because now not that you were trying to break records, but you also wanted to play new stuff, something that was
Yeah.
different, that kind of separated you from everything else. And
Right.
they started to get really tight, and it was no longer as fun as I envisioned after a while.
Right.
Um, but yeah, anyway, so that style of music, we were getting all. I mean, I was getting stuff from Chicago. There was a place called UC, or Underground Connection. So it was a lot of like hard house stuff that was coming out of the Chicago area, and I picked up a lot of cool records from them. But again, I can only play those at a certain time, which was probably after midnight on the radio, not during mainstream 5 o'clock, 12 o'clock, noon, 8 o'clock mix. You had
Right.
to wait till after hours when no one was listening. So I was like, oh my God, and I love house music.
Right. Well, man, it's cool. Thanks for that story. I feel like in that era, I'm sure you appreciated finding a rare gem so much more. That's one thing I definitely think I didn't really get, kind of the culture of like, when you find a dope song, it's like
Right.
you want to kind of keep it as yours, because when I came up, it was like music was just ubiquitous everywhere. But I could
Yeah.
see how like kind of that culture originated, where like if you spent all day in the store
Right.
and you had to spend a lot of time and effort digging, and you find that one, it makes it really special.
It
It
really
still kind of
does.
happens online, but like the finding it is just more going through a bunch of trash. That's not
It
very good.
is.
It's just
And,
easier to go
and
through more.
I think what I appreciate now, but at the same time, kind of takes away from the whole thing of
Yeah.
record searching, is like, when you find something, it's like once you share it online, like everybody knows about it, right? So now they
Yeah.
know exactly where to go, what exactly to buy, and it kind of takes away that feeling of like, I just, like you were saying, just like I just found something that's unique. Not that you're not trying to share it, but at the same time, it is right. It's almost like you want to be selfish, but you also want to share it, because really, music is meant to be shared, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what it's about. I think it's important, and so I purposely, like, okay, I'm not going to hold this to myself. I'm going to show my friends, and then my friends will, share that, or if they like it, and if they may not. So it's really up to them. Music is funny that way, where it's like we all have different tastes, and what you may like is something I may hate, and vice versa. And then we might both find something and we're both vibing into it exactly the same way. So that's one thing about, again, music, is that it's very unique in that sense. Sacramento eventually end up with some really good record stores. So after, maybe 2 or 3 years going to the Bay Area, Sacramento did end up putting up a few stores. So my transition and my travel time was far less, because I started to go to Sacramento to the stores there. And the guys that were working the stores there at the time, some of them are still DJs here in the Sacramento area, that are friends of mine, and so they're still
Nice.
into it. So I can appreciate and respect those that who been doing it, things as long as I have, even longer. Because I really thought, like, how long am I going to do this for?
Right. Right.
And here I am still, having fun with it. So it kind of makes you feel like you're kind of still relevant.
Nice. Well, yeah, let's jump into starting exclusive DJ. At what point in your life did you start it? Like, where did you have the idea? Was it like all at once, or was it kind of gradual? Just talk a little bit about the
Yeah,
story
well,
of how that all went down.
it was gradual. Again, it went from radio, high school to radio, and then after having some sort of experience on radio, and then getting like a little bit of name recognition, I guess, here locally, I started to work at, many of the popular hot nightclubs in town. And through that, occasionally I'd come across people like, hey, I've got a birthday party, I've got a wedding. And I was always, afraid to talk on the mic. I wasn't more concerned. I was more concerned with just playing the music, right? But
Yeah.
in order to pick up these gigs, again, sometimes you have to make like an introduction. Again, I was overthinking things. I'd stress over things that were like, just pick up the microphone and say, "Hey, welcome," right? It's
Table
not that
four is
hard.
now served.
Yeah, exactly. And so it took me a while to kind of break that shell for myself. And so when I stopped doing the radio, I was working these clubs and I was getting, asked, not all the time, but on occasion, "Hey, I've got a wedding. I've got a wedding. I've got a wedding." Occasional quinceañera here and there. And I found like, okay, well, you know what? I'm getting booked occasionally again. Um, and at a certain point in time, I realized like, look, this could be like a legit business. Um, and so I was doing enough business without actually thinking of it as a business for myself, that I realized like after a while, like the money is in the business side of things, which are the private sector, right? The
Hmm.
clubs are going to provide you fun and experience. And if you're a heavy drinker, then all the alcohol you want, which I'm not a heavy drinker. Um, so it was like, I'm cool without the alcohol. You don't need to, I'm not trying to be here to freeload off your drinks. I just want to get paid. And in the market, one thing that I realized for myself living in this particular market, and we're talking about the Central Valley, Stockton, Lodi, Manteca, we are just east of the San Francisco area, right, about an hour and a half east. That this market is very different than the Bay Area, and that this market is different than the Sacramento market, and this market is different than the LA market and the Bakersfield market. So every area has its kind of price range. And so what you can ask for as a DJ, at least at the time, was, you kind of limited yourself, even though you're putting in just the same amount of work as you would as a mobile DJ doing a wedding or an event where they paid you more. You were kind of doing yourself a disjustice and a disservice. Like, look, I could just probably stop doing these bars and these clubs and
Hmm.
go do someone's private event and probably double or triple my income for that specific night, right? And so one time I did an event for someone and I probably charged them like maybe $400. And they were like, okay. And I was like, what? Like, yeah. So to me, it was like, you're okay with that? Like
I'm at 500.
nobody barked. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like nobody barked about it. And again,
Yeah.
I probably could ask for more. But I didn't. I felt comfortable enough with that. I thought it was fair for what I was going to provide. And so I was like, wow, that was not that hard. And as I got more experiences in that regard, I was like, okay. So I started talking to other people and kind of researching, legit businesses that were already doing the wedding industry. And then I realized like, oh, there's bridal shows. Oh, where can I find these clients? Right. So I'm like, oh, you got to participate in these bridal shows. And so I figured out how to make connections with, the venues as far as like, okay, we're going to have a bridal show on this day. This is a fee you have to pay, but you're going to get business out of it. So I started to invest in those. And at first, when I got into that, whatever cool gear I had, I made sure I brought it. It's like, oh, you want to see cool lights? I'm going to bring them. You want to see these truss towers that no one else has? Cool, I'm going to bring them. So I would bring like a legitimate production, which I didn't need to bring. I found that out later, right? So my booth, if you want to call it that, looked pretty cool, but it was like
Hmm.
I was already paying money into it. So it was like I was putting all this effort into these bridal shows. Now I was attracting attention, but it wasn't necessarily giving me the bookings. So that's what I found kind of odd. Like, look, how come my booth looks so cool, way better than X, Y, and Z, but why are they getting all the bookings, right? So I had to understand that it wasn't about only presentation, like what people walk in and see. It also had to do with pricing, and it also had to do with the way you spoke with them, right? And I realized like, okay, I'm not really presenting myself personally as a person the way I should. Maybe I've got the cool gear, and maybe I can
Right.
mix and whatever, but they don't care about that. That's in addition. Whatever your persona is, you also have to kind of become a salesman. And so, not that I was trying to be convincing, like, oh, this and that, because I'm not a salesman. I'm more of an honest person. So I think where I shot I always shoot myself in the foot that way too. Is like I find that I give more information than I need to, right? And
Yeah.
that's just because
100%.
I'm just want them to be 100% real with them and upfront, and so that they know what they're getting. And so I started to dwindle my production side back. It's like, okay, you know what? I don't need to carry these towers anymore with these moving headlights. I just need to have a nice banner with my business name, maybe some nice brochures, right, and a nice presentation on a table, that alone is attractive. Not worrying about the towers and the lights and the cool LEDs in the back. It's like that was above an extra, which is fine if people still do it now. But then I realized, like, again, I wanted to be in it. Now I would see these other productions come in, they'd set up and they tear down in 15, 20 minutes. Like, dude, it takes me an hour to come in and set up and
Right.
do the same thing over, right? And I was like, why am I killing myself? And then they're still getting all the business. So I learned from that. But long story short is that after so many inquiries of weddings, I realized that, okay, there's more money to be made in the wedding or mobile DJ private sector than there is working for these cool bars and cool clubs. I kind of felt like I had already done it, and I was now going to make a little extra money and concentrate more on building a business that was going to be long term, because these clubs come and go, right? So if that club shuts down for any reason out of your control, somebody can have a fight in the parking lot. They can have bad service, that things that are out of your control. Guess what? You're no longer having a job either. So I felt like I
Right.
needed to take actions into my own hands, right? And so therefore I realized, well, let me build this business. I don't know what to call it. So it actually started as Exclusive Music Network, right? And I was trying to be cool and savvy with the words. So I was like, exclusive. Okay, we won't use the E. We'll just start with X in the Exclusive Music Network. And then it became like, okay, well, then it's XMN DJs. And then it's like, and people were saying, oh, you're the X-Men DJ. And it's like, no, I'm not X-Men. It kind of became comical that way. And I was like, I didn't. So then it kind of turned me off. And
Yeah.
I was like, man. And again, as you get older and you talk to the right people, they realize, like, marketing has a lot to do with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so at the time, the internet was just kind of starting to really take off, and like, you don't want people searching for XMN because they don't know what they're doing. And you just want something basic and simple that remember people will remember. So I was like, oh, exclusive, these the word, and obviously we're DJ, so you want to have, if you can, the word DJ in there. Nowadays it doesn't matter anyway, but I figured, well, that sounds easier to spell out, to remember, than Exclusive Music Network. And now you have to put exclusive without the E. Again, the more things,
Yeah.
again, as I got older, the more things we give people to do, the less they're going to remember. So let's just make it easier. And I was not going for, the younger crowd. I was going for someone who had a job. So most of the people are elderly, and they're, when I say elderly, I was probably looking for the 30, 40-year-old. And at the time I was early, my early 20s. So I felt young. Um, so I had to kind of rethink the whole process. And then I had already printed brochures and invested in that. So I waited for that to kind of dwindle down, that inventory to go down. And then I decided to switch the name of the business to just Exclusive DJ, right? And then from that, again, I started that in 2001. It's funny because I just came across a piece of paperwork the other day. I was going through some old files that had the date when I first went to the what was the building, administrative building, where you go and register your business name, right?
Right.
And then they
Right.
have the date, the name, and that's when I was like, oh, this started out as Exclusive Music Network, but then I had to go
Right.
refile, a few years later. So yeah, I started that in 2001, and that was strictly for business decisions to see, like, you know what, I'm going to make a lot more money. This is going to have a lot more longevity for my own personal growth, and for my own financial growth, if I just take matters into my own hands instead of trying to stick with what's cool and relevant now that in 5 years could not be, because again, restaurants and clubs come and go just like anything else. So I wanted to be able to still be standing after that.
Right.
And
100%.
luckily it's worked out. Luckily it's worked out for me.
That's awesome, man. So what was your? You talked a little bit about like going to wedding expos. How did your like customer acquisition strategy change over time, and what would you say that you do now? Obviously, you've been in the game for a while, so I'm sure you have a lot of word of mouth. But do you do anything now, like online or like kind of active customer marketing strategies to try to get new clients, or is it a lot of just inbound at this point?
A lot of it is just inbound because I already have, like, what I look at my business as like it has seasonal changes, right? So I know that from April through probably September, it's going to be more focused on weddings, right? And I know that I'm going to get X amount of weddings, based on the connections that I have with either wedding planners or venues themselves, that I'm going to get a percentage of a referral business just directly from them. The other thing is, if I market or really try to be creative online through a social media to promote specials or whatever, which I haven't done in years, Luckily, I have not had to do that where you have to offer like, well, if you buy 5 hours from us, you're going to get the 6 hour free, or if you pay this, you're going to get an extra uplight. You're going to add on these extra things. And so I did
Right.
have to do that at the beginning, right? Where you offered an incentive of them booking with you. And again, I learned through the time, and fortunately, that after a while, I didn't have to do that anymore, right? I had to create value for myself, right? And just because you're doing a bunch of business doesn't mean that you're doing great, because you could be offering business for dirt cheap and staying busy year after year, but you're financially not growing, but you're just working more, right? So I had to kind of realize that as well. It's like, okay, I don't want to work as I've gotten older. I realized like, okay, my time is valuable, more valuable now than it was before. One of the things that I've personally realized is that, I have a lot of experience in this stuff, in this field, and the way I came up as a DJ, um, have is very different than some of the younger generation that's come up now that is in the wedding industry. I've had the experience of I know what it feels like to lug in, heavy equipment. I have the experience of I know what it's like to go dig for records. I know I have the experience of, how heavy those milk crates were with records or so forth. So all that stuff for me has made me, I'm not going to say a better DJ, but it's allowed me an experience that I know that someone else will never have, right? And so I value myself more in that regard, that I feel like I've had more experience. So I'm able to convey that to the clients that I speak with. And they see it like, what, not that they know me from doing this for so many years, but the conversations that I have, I think it puts them at ease. Like, look, you do come across as someone who has experience. And so those that are looking for a specific type of DJ, right? Um, there are people who want a DJ who can talk and be very active and go out and grab you and and show you the coolest dance. And then you've got the real laid back DJ who really doesn't, you don't really realize he's there. It's almost like you could just play music in the background. He is there. He's playing the right music. So I would consider, lack of better word, be like an iPod DJ, right? Where it's like you've got a playlist. You're going to hear every song that you like, but it's almost like on a program mode. And like then you have the over the top guy who's going to come at you and be like, "Hey, what's going on? My name is so and so. What would you like to hear? Let me show you. Come on out here. Let me show you this." Right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
very active and they're very over. They put on, not, I wouldn't say they put on the show, but they've got a lot of energy. And some people are turned off by that, and some people love that. Again, so there are different DJs for every different client. I,
Right.
I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle where, I'll be professional about it. I'll make all the announcements you need. Um, but what I find out is that there are DJs who don't know how to mix genres, right? So if they're on a hip hop genre, they're going to stay on that for 30 minutes, and then they're going to transition to maybe a country genre, right? And then after that country genre is over, they come back and they circle around through an 80s rock genre or whatever. So with music the way it is nowadays, obviously you can touch on all the genres and mix everything here and there. In my experience with this particular market that I work in, that we're in, there are some very inexperienced DJs that can't blend all of that together, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, there could be a creativity side of being able to blend a variety of different genres all together, creates an atmosphere on the dance floor that some people don't realize. The holy moly, was I just dancing to a country song that had a hip hop beat underneath? And then he took me to a fist pumping song, and now I'm doing, a two step and so forth. So it's like you give them everything within that 30-minute time range where they don't realize they just dance to hip hop, they dance to EDM, they dance to Latin, and then a country song or so forth, where there are, unfortunately, not because they don't want to, it's just everyone has a different skill set. I'm not a master at it, but I I've learned to read crowds and recognize, like, what, today is going to be mostly R&B, soul, and hip hop, and next week's wedding is going to be more country and Latin with a little bit of pop, and so forth. So I've learned to recognize what works a crowd, and that just comes from the experience, and I think if you started off now recently, it's going to take you a little while, to understand how to read a crowd without necessarily having them giving you a sheet of paper that says, okay, this is what we want you to play. you're gonna have to figure it out, right? And I think
Right.
with all the
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
of experience that I've had, that's where I think I've kind of created my value internally, where it's like, you know what, I would do your wedding, but I feel, or your event, but I gotta have some self worth as well. So,
Yeah.
and again,
100%.
it's sort of worked out. It's sort of worked out for me.
I think it's a time thing because like I always say, like when you're first starting, you should just go try to DJ wherever they're gonna let you set up to play music. But then once
Yeah,
as you're saying, as you get older, like age wise and DJ wise, you get more skilled, and your what you're offering becomes more valuable. You have to value yourself higher, and so I think it's kind of just a natural progression of like skill, time, energy, all those things, and then you're in a good spot where you can like do the things that you really want to do and make the money that you're trying to make. And then if you want to do
right.
something for free, then you can do that too. Nothing, no shame in
Yeah,
that, but you're able to have
right.
more choice, which I think is cool.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think and it works out for the best. I mean, again, there are events that I won't take, not specifically to anything specific, but there's just events that I just feel like, you know what, that's not my, I don't feel I do a good job for you. And so not all business is good business, right?
mhm,
For the client or for you as the person that's going to provide the service, it's like if you already internally know you're not going to be able to provide the service that they deserve, then you personally shouldn't do it. But unfortunately, sometimes financial situations prevent that. So you're like, yeah, I just need the money, so I'm going to go do it, and then you end up really tanking the job, and you're like, oh man, what did I do that for? You didn't have a good time. They had a terrible time, and so it's not a win-win for nobody. And so
right,
I've recognized that years ago. It's like, not, I don't need to take every job, not because I'm not fond of the money. It's more of the I'm more concerned with the client's, the outcome of the event. It's like, if I feel comfortable doing it, then I'm gonna do it. If somebody used to say, "Hey, I want you to do, an old, I mean, straight up, early country's gig for 5 hours," I would have to turn it down because I don't know country like that.
yeah, you gotta,
Some of the stuff today I
let
can
me hit
do
one
it,
of my
but
homies.
yeah, let me get somebody else. Let me refer you to someone else who I know has been doing this for a while and probably can do a better job than I can.
Right,
So yeah,
cool. So, um, wanted to talk about what kind of tools do you use to run your business? So in terms of like, I guess I make a lot of like DJ finance tracking tools, and I try to create tools for people who are like basically doing nothing and then can go to like 0 to 1, using a
yeah,
spreadsheet or using kind of
right.
basic tools. But I'm wondering, since you've been established for a while, what are you using to track your finances, and do you have any other like invoicing tools, or what would you recommend in terms of like a technology stack?
You know what? For me, what I use is just the accounting of the Quick Tools. I mean, a QuickBooks.
Tools.
Sorry,
Okay, cool.
QuickBooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, QuickBooks is depending on what, and I track things as a monthly scenario. It's like a lot of times people take a job and they say it's only going to pay me $400, and it's like, okay, well, those $400 at the end of the month, let's say you're making $2,000 or $6,000, now you have $6,400, right? Like, you're looking at it as a one-time gig, but look at it at the end of the month, and you'll realize that when you add all these little $200 jobs, $400 jobs, $500, and all of a sudden you've got $1,200 that you were not accounting for at the time. So everyone wants that big job, right? It's like, oh, I got a $3,000, $4,000 gig. Those are the ones I'm searching for. It's like, and that's all you're going to take. It's like, cool, if you have those kind of means, great. But little things like, I'll do, since I have the gear, is I'll do during the week an occasional AV job, which someone may come in from out of town and want to do a small presentation for a pharmaceutical company to try to push something to a hospital here. So they'll call up and be like, hey, I need a projector, and I just need one mic with a speaker. Okay, well, this is going to cost you XYZ. Sure, no problem. You go and do it. It's 2 or 3 hour job. Granted, it's not a $3,000 job or whatever it may be, but it's something you make during the week on your off time. So you start to add those little things up. By the end of the month, you're like, whoa, that was another $2,000 or $3,000 that I made by going to do these little small jobs. If you have, again, this is just me. Not everyone has to do it. It's like, I have the means to be able to do it. I'd rather have my money, my gear make me money than just sitting around in the garage doing nothing, you know?
Right.
And so I try to stay productive in that sense. And at the end of the month, when you're calculating whatever you spent and whatever you brought in, you're going to be able to see like, okay, where am I getting my money from? Because I have, I have lighting, audio, video. I have a photo booth. So you have to recognize like where you really bringing in money from, and then kind of focus on that. If you want to say, you know what, I'm not really bringing in money on the photo booth, but I'm spending a lot more money by either a paying an attendant, having to buy new props, buying the printer paper and all that other stuff, and you're like realizing like if my ROA on that is not very profitable, maybe photo booth is not something that I should be focused on. Maybe I need to focus more on this AV stuff because I'm getting more jobs that way, and I'm having to turn down jobs on that side because I only have one or two projector screens or one and two projectors or whatever, right? So you'll be able to see that through QuickBooks, based on how you categorize your gear and your business aspects, so that every month you can look at that, what they call it the P&L, and see what business, what side of your business is bringing you more money, and maybe you want to focus on that.
So can you tag, like, so let's say you have an invoice, you'll be able to see like which items, and then it will show you like which item sales basically are
Yeah.
included
So
as part of your revenue?
again, you're going to have everybody's QuickBooks is different. So you itemize things, right? You create some sort of a spreadsheet or something internally there that says, okay, I'm going to call this photo booth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from that photo booth, you're going to have a drop down that says, okay, printer paper, photo props, photo booth attendance. So then you're like, okay, I paid out X amount of dollars for the attendant. I paid X amount of dollars for the paper this month. I paid X amount of dollars to get these props for this special event, right? So at the end of the month, you can break that down, and the way you've got it categorized, it's going to allow you to say, oh, you know what, this month I only spent, $50 on one set of photo paper, and then I spent, X amount of dollars paying this guy or this gal to run the booth, and so forth. And then once you start tracking that down monthly, because I use it you want to track these down quarterly, and then eventually you get your end result. Is you're going to be able to see, based on how you itemize this, how much you spent on that specific part of your business, right? So we're talking about the photo booth, so you can break that down independently, and then you have another section where it's like, okay, I'm going to categorize this as AV, AV stuff. And so you realize like, okay, you know what, I didn't have any projectors this month. I had to rent from someone, and I have to continue to rent this screen from this person. So you're dishing out money for rentals, and you realize like, if I would just bought myself one, I would have already paid for that based on the accounting that I'm keeping track of here monthly. So yeah, if you QuickBooks is a slick program to use for any type of business.
Right. I'm like right in between where like my personal DJ business wasn't to the point where I felt like I needed it, but like I'm right on the
Yeah,
cusp where like using the software to automatically import the transactions is like
right.
right in my future. So I'm like right in between using it, and I want to do like an article about it, like, to kind of talk about the transition and when it's helpful, because I don't think
Right.
everybody needs it, but once you reach a certain point, especially if you're doing it full time, I think it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And if you've got multiple aspects of things that you're offering, right? Because again, I'm a DJ for the most part. Most of my business comes from doing events, but because of the times that I've spent on gear and invested on certain projects, right? I didn't go out and buy a projector just because one day I decided, well, I just want to buy a projector. I bought it because there was enough interest in someone saying, hey, do you offer slideshow services with your DJ? It's like, well, no, but you know what? Hold on to that thought. And then you go and do the research. Like, you know what? I'm going to buy, $600 projector, and I've already gotten like 4 inquiries for, slideshow presentations. And if I charge them XYZ, that's going to pay for the projector. And then I'm going to continue to use that in the future for other purposes, which now are already being used to do presentations, PowerPoint presentations for these pharmaceutical companies, right? So it pays itself off in the end. But again, those are when you realize like, was that a good investment or not? There's been bad investments that I bought where I went and bought a bunch of strobe lights, right? Because I was
Mm-hmm.
doing productions and parties, but that kind of took a thing sideways once COVID hit, and then before that, just finding venues to throw these events at were kind of
Right.
limited. So I went and bought all these lights, and I probably used them once, right? So I'm like, man, so I made this bad investment, bad choice.
Right.
And so you live and learn. That's part of business. You live and learn, and you realize like, okay, I need to focus my attention on things that are going to, give me a good return on my investment.
For sure. All right, dope, man. Well, this has been dope. Before we go into the last part of like DJ style, just any last like thoughts, advice for young DJs out there who either just getting started, and in terms of like want to take it from like the bedroom out to their first gigs, and or people who are like looking to potentially create a mobile business for themselves? Like any kind of high level advice for them?
I mean, I think you definitely have to love what you do. You know, you have to enjoy. I mean, maybe love is a strong word, but you really have to enjoy what you do, and you have to be sincere about the service that you are wanting to offer and have someone expect you to pay for, right? So I think that in general in business, like if you are willing to, you know, there's going to be days where you're going to probably put in more than you thought you were, right? So there's been plenty of jobs where I end up spending extra time on either planning or actually investing in that. I was like, man, that was not even worth the money that I paid for, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you sulk on that and you feel like you're always losing, then I think you're like kind of in the wrong aspect of it. It's like you have to let those come and go, because if you really enjoy what you're doing, you're probably going to have limit feelings of that regard where you feel like you're always losing, because you should be enjoying yourself, right? Even if you're not making the amount of money that you thought, if you're enjoying yourself, then that alone has a value in it, you know, because I think in the world we live in, you know, with all the bad things that you see all the time, it's like we should have happiness in our lives, right? And so if DJing, whether it's for thousands of dollars or for minimal dollars, if you're actually enjoying, if the process of DJing and the element of you performing somewhere for someone gives you that joy, you know, regardless of the money that you're making, I mean, I think that's an important thing to have as a person in general, right? Because we need to fulfill our souls with happiness. And so I think if we're feeling that, the whole aspect of having worked extra longer or did a little extra thing and didn't get paid for, it kind of goes to the wayside, right? Because it always finds a way on the other end that you're going to get repaid. You're going to find jobs where you're like, dude, I'm getting paid to do this. Like, seriously, I feel like I'm cheating someone, right?
Right.
You're going to have the bads and the goods and the bad. So you have to understand that there is a balance, right? There is a balance. And if you can understand that, I think, you will understand that um, things will come and things will go. So don't just focus on the good things or on the bad things. It's like you're going to have both. And if you find a balance between both, I think you can be very successful at anything, you know, especially in business, but you have to kind of comprehend that. Again, that's just for me, because I enjoy music and I enjoy playing music for people, and I love the creativity side of it. And when you can be creative and you can see the crowd react to your creativity, that gives you even a more sense of like, okay, that was worth it. You know, that was worth it. It's a fulfillment internally that makes me feel good. And, you know, obviously, I think it creates a happy soul, which relieves stress on your life. Again, I'm not a pill popping person kind of guy, so I don't need to be introducing any synthetics in my body. It's like if I can create that happiness just naturally, you know, with what I'm doing,
Yeah.
their soul is happy, right? But yeah, I mean, start off, you know, we all started somewhere, and just grinding, you know, continue to talk with people, because you're going to have people who lead you in the right direction, and you're going to have people who have malice, you know, but you're going to be able to spot those people who don't want to see you come up, you know. And once you find the people that want to see you grow, you know, take their words to heart, you know, seriously, take them serious. Don't brush them off, you know, and be thankful to them. You know, you don't have to give them monetary kickbacks or anything like that. A genuine person is going to want to just give, because, and you're going to sense that, and you're going to feel it's like this person is legitimately going to want to help me or give me, you know, I'm on the tail end of me on the business side of it. I've been doing this for a long time. So anytime that I can help someone with anything in regards to the business, is like if they approach me, how do you make this edit, or where'd you buy the speaker, or what, you know, any recommendations, like I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to hold anything back that says I'm going to steer this guy the wrong way because I don't want him to have what I have. You know, it's like, what good does that do? It's like we're only here for a short time, right? So the next phase of people has to come in and do this thing, carry it along. And so if you're willing to help them, I mean, again, I believe in the fact that, you know, karma is a big thing, and so I'm willing to just bet on karma and, you know, be be open and genuine with people about my business and what I do, as opposed to trying to hold things back because I'm afraid that they're going to surpass me or they're going to be better than me. And it's like, hey, more power to them, right? More power to them. And hopefully they'll bring you along with them if they become successful. It's like, hey, you know what? You helped me out when I was just getting started. Let me get you here, or let me buy you this, or let me, let's just work to this together, right? So I think it's important that we make connections with really with everyone, but be selective of who you really, uh, I guess, connect 100% with, and you'll see the people who have malice in their heart, and those who are like legit, like people who want to see you grow and show you that love. That's
Right.
kind of what I do.
Yeah, 100% genuine relationships are always the name of the game. And again, just to bring it back to the opening, thank you for putting yourself into us and giving us that wisdom and being a good relationship with us and someone that we could always count on. Even now, I'm hitting you up for gigs to work at Pacific, so appreciate
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no. And anytime I'm able to help, I'm always willing. I mean, you guys are good people. And I like to see you guys and continue to see your guys' growth. I mean, seeing your guys' stories and what you guys are doing, it's like, wow, this is incredible, right? I mean, these are some young adults here who really found a way, to um, take themselves to another level from where they started years ago. And again, I think that's amazing for you guys. And I love to see like just anyone grow. It's awesome, and I'm supportive of that. It's like, you know what, I'm going to go check out this person because I saw him or her grow. I just want to go see their show, and it's not because I'm looking for it. It's like I just enjoy it. And so you guys are doing amazing things, and hats off to you guys, and so keep growing.
Word. All right, man. Well, let's tie it up here with just the ending style portion. I always like to touch on this. So, number one, what music are you listening to when you're not DJing, when no one else is listening? And then number two, what's your library organization strategy?
Oh, um, I like house music, right? I've always been a house music lover since back in the day. Although I didn't get into house music till the early '90s. Um, from that point onward, obviously, just anything that was upbeat, dancey, positive. Um, Most of the time, it was a groove, right, where it had a soulful sound or some sort of a funky bounce to it. That's what kind of drew me before the EDM styles kind of started to come in the late 2000s or mid 2000, whatever it was. Um, but prior to that was that, and I'll still listen to today, is the old school hip hop. The real, what I consider like, the GOAT is Rakim to me, right? I love his flow, the lyrics that he spits, and they're still relevant. It's weird because like a lot of those old hip hops, right, like the Grandmaster Flash, and they talked about things in society back then that are still happening today, right? And so it's like, wow, that lyric still hits today. It means the same today, or it even hits harder today because of what they were going through, whatever they were experiencing. Right, this was all stuff that was coming from the streets, and sad to say, unfortunately, some of those things are still going on today. Right, not to get political or anything like that, but it's a trip. So you listen to those stories from the old back in the day. Some of the new hip hop artists, throw out some really cool lines like that, but I'm really more stuck on the back end of the old hip hop back in the days. And then really, if I go in the car, if I'm going to work, wherever I might be going, it's usually house music. That's really what I'm
Nice.
playing,
Left
because it
field
has,
makes way more sense now.
yeah, yeah.
Little Frank.
So,
Shout out Little Frank.
yes, yes,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Cool.
House
Then in
music's where it's
terms
at.
of I love that. I love that. In terms of library organization, everyone has a different style. Do you have like a general strategy that you like? How do you get from like listening to music all the way to like it's organized in your Serato crate?
Oh man, I'd be lying if I say I have an organization skill or any type of library. I'd be making that up. I really don't. You know, I do have folders, obviously, that I've created on Serato where I may have, and again, this is just real basic stuff, and I'm sure I got to assume I could be wrong. Everyone has, music laid out based on either the decades or the genre of style of music, right? So if you have, you like hip hop, early hip hop, you're going to probably put a bunch of pre 1990 hip hop hits in this particular folder. If you like 90s R&B and hip hop, you're probably going to go put that stuff in that folder, right? And it just makes it easier to go through. Um, Same thing with house, or for me, I what works for me is I have a folder and I just call it old school. Anything that I in my world that I consider to be called old school from where
Mm-hmm.
I grew up, I just drop it in there because it doesn't need to make sense to you. It just needs to make sense to me,
Right.
right? That's what's important is that our organizational skills don't have to matter to your buddy who's also the DJ. They just have to matter to you because it's not like he's not using my library and I'm not using his, although we may be using the same songs, we categorize them differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the perfect example is I met with a client today whose wedding I'm doing. And so I asked her a question about what music do you think that you'd like to have played during like the cocktail hour, right? Because again, everything that I do as far as wedding related stuff goes is important to me from the point that they do their ceremony to they transition to a cocktail hour to a dinner time and then to eventually reception. It's like it's not just let me find a playlist on Spotify and let me just roll that because somebody created, so I'm going to just roll that, right? It's like no, that's the easy cheap way out. It's like create something for the client that is specifically to their taste. So when I asked her, it's like, what would you think you like to? Most of the time they don't know you, and that this is where it's important, where your experience will kind of guide your client through this whole thing. It's like, do you like hip hop? Do you like rock? Do you like country? And then and then so it's like, okay, that's about you. What about your guests? And they're like, oh, I don't know what my guests like. Well, you invited them, right? You should know this is your friends and family. What do you think
Yeah.
they're into? And then they're like, you know what? I never thought about that. So it opens up a little more dialogue and it goes deeper into the conversation, and then it allows me to really curate a playlist ahead of time on my folder that I know is going to be to their liking. So when I asked her about that, she says, "Oh, just I like the old school stuff." And I was like, "Okay, let me ask you what your old school is, because what my old school is. What is your?" And then so she brought up, she said, "Oh, like Def Leppard," and I was like, "Oh, Def Leppard is definitely not old school for me, right? That's definitely more '80s rock in my perspective, right? So I would
Right.
put that
That's
in
how you
an
tag
'80s
it.
rock
Yeah.
era, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Not, I wouldn't say old school." And so she kind of laughed about it because it's like you understand. It's like I am 50, you are in your early 20s, so I can understand how you would think that's old school to you, but that's more 80. And so she laughed about it, and we had giggle, and it made sense. Her, it's like, okay, now I get it. Now I know why you're asking me these things, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
your parents are probably what old school is, and they would probably fall in line with what I think of old school is. But your old school is definitely not old school, right? So again,
Yep.
so everybody's folders are different. And so again, back to what I was saying is that your old school in your particular folder, I don't know what you would consider old school, right? So let me ask you that is like, what do you consider old school?
Uh, Probably 80s, 90s. I think 2000s was I was like growing up, young kid, like 10ish, something like that.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I would probably put like I guess there's different kinds of old school as well. I think rock might be in there, like a lot of Motown kind of stuff. Um,
But why
so
would you consider that? So if somebody said, I want old school, right? Like for me, I don't consider, I don't consider rock old school. And so I guess the word old school is kind of just a general term, right? It just
yeah,
means
it's
old music,
subjective.
I guess, for most people, right? Right, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
just like
subjective.
before
So
this time.
yes, right. Before this time. So you mentioned 90s. So to me, again, in my era, I wouldn't consider anything past the 90s old school no more, right? To me, the old schools is before the 90s. And I wouldn't even say 70s because now the way I categorize it in my head, again, this is just me, is I take the trends of music that were popular back in the days. In the 70s, for me, were disco era days, were like the Motown era days, right? And then you had uh, there was other like classic rock, right? Pre 80 stuff. So you had that to me would be 70s. And then when you get to the 80s, for me, that's what I would consider old school. For me, would be like the soul, um, R&B, funk, um,
Mm,
that's what I would consider old school for me, right? Your Earth, Winds, and Fires, your Cameos, your Rick James,
yeah, yeah,
your Michael Jacksons, your Cheryl Lynn's, all that stuff to me is like what I would consider old school. And then so somebody starts talking about, oh, I want to hear Donna Summer and I want to hear the Bee Gees and I want to hear Well, it's like, okay, you're talking about disco now. We're talking disco. That's pre 80s. And then before that, you had your 60s, your doo-wops and your bebops. And again, our categories, we may play the same music, but we categorize them different in our folders in Serato, right?
Right.
So when it comes to libraries, I guess to answer your question is like, I create them based on the way I feel or where that specific song falls within that genre. So I'll have my 80s, 90s, 70s, 60s, and 50s. And then I'll have today's top hits, hip hop. And then I'll have a house music folder that is top 40. And then I'll have my own folder where it's like, okay, this is the kind of stuff that's deeper, that's harder, that I know I can't get away with at a wedding. But if I was doing someone's popular, party at their own house, or they really wanted to go deep with house music, I'm going to hit them with this. And same thing with hip hop, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then you got your West Coast hip hop in there. And again, so I guess it's based on, I don't want to say age, but again, my old school is different than yours, and vice versa.
That's why I love this question, because there's just always a unique answer. I need
Yeah.
to hear. I need
Oh,
to hear
absolutely.
a DJ Frank G house mixtape. Do you got any of
Someday. No,
those?
I probably, you know what?
I would love
I
that.
probably do. Funny you mentioned that, because my son Frank, which he just bought a cassette tape, and I was a cassette player, and I have one here at home because I still have old house music tapes that I would record from the radio.
No
And he
way.
heard me playing one time, yeah, and he heard me playing. He's like, "Can I get a copy of that?" I was like you don't want a copy of this tape? And again, it just kind of was intriguing, because I think with technology being what they are now, what it is now, I don't know. Now, do you personally record stuff? So I've got a question. So have you ever recorded mixes through Serato for yourself?
Yeah, I have mixes, but
Okay,
it's all through
so
Serato.
yeah, so when you record, you're recording into your computer, to your hard drive, or what are you
Mm-hmm.
doing?
Yeah,
Correct. All right.
just inside
So
Serato.
obviously
Yeah.
that's a digital sound, right? So have you tried recording, going through your mixer and then going out to a tape deck, like going back to analog and reverse?
I haven't
Like, have you
tried that
tried to
yet.
make a tip on it? Yeah. So I was thinking about that. It's like, I wonder what it would sound like, right? Since everything is digital, if we went back and reverse and recorded into analog, like,
Right.
how would that sound? And if we were only to say, if somebody says, "Hey, make me a mixtape," and you're like, "Okay, I've got a mixtape for you," and then you legitimately
Hand him the
hand them a
tape.
mixtape, yeah, be like,
Yeah.
it. I think it kind of creates that whole, like, I want to hear this, but I don't have a resource to play this. Like, we'll figure it out. Find someone who does. Right. That's the only way you're going to be able to hear this. I don't know. It's kind of unique in that sense, as opposed to the way technology is nowadays,
Right.
to like just distribute it. You can play it on your phone or whatever. It's like, I think there's value in that. Where it's like, this is the only way you're going to hear this mix, is to be able to have a copy of it on an actual tape.
Right.
Again, just having the means and the resources to goof around and play around with old technology and new technology, I think it's again interesting. All right.
Yeah, it's cool. I remember when I was a kid, my dad's a musician, and so he
Yes.
would he would
Okay.
like record, songs for like my stepmom and stuff, like, and it would be
Yeah.
on tape, and I still have one of the tapes. So
Really.
when you're talking about your tape, it kind of reminded me of that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And you
Um,
know what I mean? And then you have a physical tape of it, right?
yeah, and now I gotta like
Yeah,
find a tape player and hope it still plays.
exactly.
Right,
Is it still in
but
its
it's
case,
cool.
or just kind of floating around?
I don't think it's in the case.
Oh, you better find the case for
I
that, man.
know,
You better treasure that.
I know. Awesome, man. Well, DJ Frank G, exclusive DJ. If anyone is in the Central Valley, needs a mobile, needs production, hit up my guy here. Thank you again for coming on Business of DJing. This has been awesome. Any last words? Any place people can find you online, social media, anything like that?
I'm on Instagram. It's just DJ Frank G, all one word. And then my business is Exclusive DJ Group on IG, as well as Facebook. Um, and then on the web, we have a website, exclusivedj.net. That's where we're at. And then obviously we're on Yelp. So you can always find and see reviews and pictures on Yelp if you're looking for someone to provide some sort of a mobile gig for you. Check us out there and check out the reviews, check out the pictures, and then, send us an email or call. We're easy to find. And so we'd be happy to hook you up with what's available and be, glad to help.
Awesome, man. Thank you for coming on.
I
Till next
appreciate you
time.
for I appreciate you reaching out and making this happen. It was fun.
100%.